Welcome to Women in Business Around the World, a series of lightning talks. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of our colleagues around the world. My name is Carla Ruffer, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the Center for European Studies at the University of Florida. I'm joined by my colleagues, Deborah Jane, Outreach Coordinator for the Institute for Global Studies at the University of Minnesota, Bill Shackleton, Interim Managing Director at the Center for Global Studies at the University of Washington, Jackson School of International Studies, and Emma Harver, Director of Outreach for the Duke UNC Consortium for Middle East Studies. The speakers in this series will discuss their experience as women in business or their research on women in business in relation to Europe, the Middle East, and globally. While representation is on the rise for women in business, women are still underrepresented in the field globally. It has been proven that women make significant positive changes to organizational culture and processes, as well as to the bottom line. Women around the world are excelling as entrepreneurs, running mature businesses, and bringing more diversity to the workforce. We're happy you agree and that you're here to listen to this engaging talk from our speakers. Brief housekeeping notes. Each speaker will present for about 15 minutes. These talks are designed to provide flashes of information and insight. And as a result, we won't be doing Q&A, but you are welcome to follow up with the presenters independently or to reach out to us. Also, the series is being recorded and it will be shared on our center's websites. So without further ado, let's begin. Our first speaker is Adoración Perez Troya. Her talk is titled Women on Boards, Status, Questions, and Recent Advances in the European Union. Dr. Perez Troya teaches commercial and company law at the University of Alcalá in Madrid, Spain. Her current research focuses on corporate and finance and gender law. Her latest published work in 2021 is a book chapter titled Corporate Governance and Gender Diversity in Europe, a strategic win-win opportunity in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Perez Troya.
So thank you very much for inviting me to this event. I am very honored to take part in it. I think it's very important to reflect on the role of women in global business and to do so from different perspectives. My talk will focus on the importance of women's representation on company boards, and I will briefly outline the current situation in the European Union and in their member states, today 27, which retain the capacity to legislate either by improving the common legislation adopted within the Union or by regulating in those areas where the European Union is not yet in a position to legislate. This is important to remember for the issue under discussion related to women's rights in the economic arena. Regarding the issue, first of all, I would like to raise two introductory questions. The first, why are company boards so important? The second, why is so important for boards to be gender balanced? The first is easy to answer. Together with the general meetings, the decision-making body of the shareholders, boards of directors are the structures in which the most important economic decisions are made in companies. The board is in charge of the approval of major strategic and financial decisions. Accordingly, boards of directors are seen as an important corporate governance mechanism. Corporate governance is concerned with how power and control over resources and decision-making in a company are distributed, and give us a picture about the rights and responsibilities of different stakeholders towards a company. As is well known, the primary stakeholders in corporations are its investors, that is shareholders, and together with them there are the employees, customers and suppliers or creditors. Also, with the increasing attention on corporate social responsibility, the concept of a stakeholder has been extended to include communities, leading to the recognition that companies have an important role to play in relation of global sustainability and human rights, as in particular the rights to equality between men and women. Consequently, good corporate governance is one that seeks a balance between the different stakeholders, considering that the own survival of the business and the growth of the company depends on this balance. But bad corporate governance is that which favors only one type of stakeholder. This is the case of companies whose boards of directors seek only short-term profit to please shareholders. The idea that companies should have good corporate governance is currently uncontroversial and is supported in the sense mentioned by the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance. So, having answered the first question, the second one does not seem so difficult. So I am going to answer the question by asking another one to you. Do you think that good corporate governance is better guaranteed by a board composed only of men who in the picture on the left are moreover all white, all of similar age and possibly with a similar background? Or do you think good corporate governance would be better guaranteed by a diverse board of directors like the one in the picture on the right, composed of men and women of different races, different ages, and possibly different backgrounds? It seems reasonable to understand that it is better for the board to be diverse because it will be broad-minded, not single-minded. And this is why companies with diversity in boards, as many studies shows, have better performance because the board can take decisions with a broader strategic vision. Obviously, the most basic and fundamental issue for diversity is a balanced composition of men and women, because more than half of the population are women. Of course, having women on the board does not guarantee that a particular company will have a good performance, because that is not guaranteed either if the company only includes men. The performance will depend on whether the women and men appointed to the board are smart, high prepared, and have good business insight. Well, what are company boards in the European Union like? Are they more like the picture on the left or on the right? Do they have a gender balance, considering that balance is when the 40%, 60% rule is met and women make up at least 40%? Well, the answer is no. Let's look at the statistics of the biggest companies, the listed ones in all 27 countries. In all member states of the European Union, men make up the majority of board directors and women are underrepresented. Only in France, where women hold 45% of board positions, there is a gender balance on boards. 5 countries are over 35%, but not yet in the 40%. These 5 countries are Italy, Belgium, Sweden, Netherlands, and Germany. Below this, there is another group of 4 which exceed 30%, Finland, Denmark, Austria, and Spain. Looking at the bottom, the most underrepresented countries, we have 10 countries where the share is still below 20%. The worst case, Estonia, with less than 10% of women. Looking at the whole picture, we see that the situation among the 27 member states is very different. This large difference shows the failure of the European Union in establishing a common regulation, which was attempted with the presentation of a directive in 2012 that has not yet been approved and remain blocked due to the lack of consensus. So the question that we can ask ourselves then is, why is the situation better in some member states than in others? To answer the question, it is interesting to see the progress in the different states. We will quickly refer to 3 significant. One is Spain, whose evolution is a gradual upward curve. We have gone from less than 5% of female directors in 2003 to nearly 30% in 2020. If we look at the evolution of France over the same period, we can see that there was a significant jump in 2011 and that in 2016 gender balance was achieved with more than 40% of female directors. If we look at the evolution of Italy, we also observed that share was very low in 2003 with less than 5% until 2011 and with a significant jump in 2014 2015, going from a representation in 2013 of just 15% to an accelerated rise in just a few years later. All these differences are related with how the issue has been dealt with in each member state. 9 member states have introduced gender quotas for boards in the laws. The first was Spain in 2007. We can see that in 2011, Belgium, France, Italy, and Netherlands introduced gender quotas. Later, Germany in 2015, Austria and Portugal in 2017, and Greece in 2020. We can see that only Spain, France, and Italy have a gender quota of 40%. In other countries, the law it is below equilibrium level. The criteria for applicability of the gender quota is limited in the 3 known countries to big companies, including public listed companies and companies not listed, but with a defined size, tending to exclude all small and medium-sized enterprises. Other interesting points of comparison are the lasting of temporary nature of the quota, which is permanent in most countries, and the fundamental issue of sanctions in case of non-compliance. In Spain, for example, there is no sanction, and this explains why there has not been a jump forward and why we haven't achieved an equilibrium as in France. The most commonly prescribed sanction for non-compliance is the open seat. It means that the chair that have to be for a woman remain empty until compliance. In some countries, like in Italy, there are monetary sanctions for the company. And in some others, like in France, the directors don't receive payments until the company comply with the quota. As far as I know, in all these countries with sanctions, companies hadn't have problems to fulfill the quota, while in Spain, without sanctions, companies don't make enough efforts for having gender balanced boards. All of these give, moreover, of the issue today under discussion food for thought about the nature of the laws and the importance of sanctions. But regarding of the issue today, this brief panoramic allows us for some conclusions and final remarks. 5. 1. There are 9 member states with gender quotas. 9 of the member states without gender quotas have corporate governance codes with recommendations. And 9 member states have neither gender quotas nor recommendations. Comparison shows that gender quotas are an effective policy for increasing the share of women on boards. Countries with quotas have a higher share of women on their boards than countries without. The 3 in the top position are countries with quotas: France, Italy, and Belgium. Third, the comparison also shows that gender quotas without sanctions are less effective in achieving targets than legislations with sanctions. The 3 in the top position are countries with quotas and sanctions: France, Italy, and Belgium. Or despite considerable progress in some member states, very few wars are gender balanced in Europe. The gender gap remains particularly high in executive directorships, and the majority board chairs are men. And finally, the underrepresentation of women on boards is still one of the key gender gaps in the European Union. Without closing this gender gap, gender equality in economic decision-making cannot be reached. More harmonization, of course, is needed at European level. Thank you very much for your attention. Comments are welcome to my email. And thank you to the organization and all the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Perez Troya. Our next speaker is Yara Al Sayed. Yara is based in Dubai, is a regional marketing manager for fragrance and fashion accessories at Parfums Christian Dior Orient. Her talk is titled Being a Multiplier. Yara is a young professional who has over 8 years of regional marketing experience in the Middle East. I will turn it over to Yara.
Super. Hi, guys. Can everyone hear me? Great. So let's go ahead. Let me just try to share the screen. It's always the issue. There we go. First of all, thank you for having me. My name is Yara. So thanks for the introduction. Before I start, I just want to say that everything I cover today is my personal opinion on the subject of women in business in the Middle East. So while I'm here, I represent myself, not any company, organization, or third party. I've actually always wanted to say this. I never had a reason to say it. So thank you for giving me a reason to say it. And let's go ahead and start. So a bit about myself. I am from a small country called Bahrain. It's really a tiny island, the Middle East, next to Saudi Arabia and Dubai. It's about an hour flight from Dubai. That's where I grew up. That's where I graduated high school. And then I did a BA in marketing and international business at the University of Washington, Seattle, where I got also the CISB degree. So we have one of our friends from the CISB community here today to help facilitate. That's a bit of the background for me. And when I graduated, I came back to the Middle East to start my life here in Dubai. That was in 2014. The Dubai journey begins at Dior, specifically Parfums Christian Dior, which is the cosmetics division of the Christian Dior company. So specifically, I'm the marketing manager on luxury fragrances, if you would. Before I go into, what I had prepared to talk to you today about women in business, specifically in the Middle East, I just want to give you the context of the type of environment I work in, the type of company I work in, because LVMH is a known conglomerate. It's a French company owning many, many businesses and maisons. So I just want you to have this in mind. It's a 30-second video. I don't work in HR, so this is in no way a plug. I just want to give you the context for it. Super. So the company I work for, it's the world leader in luxury. I'm sure you know Louis Vuitton, you know Moet Hennessy, the champagne company. So the conglomerate has different divisions from wines and spirits, leather goods, perfumes and cosmetics, retailing, and so on. Really 70 different brands fall under the umbrella. Me specifically, I work in perfumes and cosmetics and marketing. The company had over 160,000 employees worldwide, so not just in the Middle East, really worldwide. This was a few years back. And in terms of split, here what I want to focus on is, this was again, a few years back, the percentage was 73% women. Specifically in my office and my experience in the Middle East, my marketing team is predominantly women. However, the company as a whole is pretty split, pretty, there's a lot of gender diversity. My point on this is, of course, just as it is everywhere around the world, and thank you for the presentation that was right before mine. I mean, we see that this is the gender pay gap, the gender inequality in the workplace. It's still an existing issue around the globe. And so, I mean, I see it as well in my workplace. It's not a region-specific problem. It's really a world problem. Yes, I'm saying 73% of the company is women, but at the same time, it really depends on, like we saw earlier, board members, really people in top leadership roles. This is where we need to see more women. And this is the point. And this is kind of the vision I have for myself as well. As a woman in the Middle East, I will be one of those women. I will not be an exception. I will also be a multiplier. I will have other women join me, because as I grow, I want them to grow. It is a gender issue, but at the same time, it's a human thing. It's not about men versus women. We need to be multipliers for everyone around us, regardless of what we do, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in politics, if you're a teacher, if you're a farmer, it doesn't matter what you do. You can be a multiplier in any part of your life, in any aspect of your life, with your friends, with your family, giving professional advice, having a talk like this, just me being on this talk for 10-15 minutes with you guys. I mean, I can't even see, who's on the call, but I don't really care. That's not the point. The point is I'm here because I hope that I can make a good difference, and I can inspire, women to lift themselves up, to know that there's no barrier in what you want in life. There are no rules. We've been taught that there are so many rules about women and men, and how women should act and what you can do. And this is how women are in a specific region. I mean, this is a world problem, but it's all in your head. It's all in our head. We can do whatever we want to. And we can do it if we are multipliers, and if we make more of us. We need to make more and more multipliers. And the only way you can do that is by leading by example, and by doing it authentically and genuinely on a day-to-day basis. So this brings us to 2022. I mean, as it was said earlier, I've been in the company for 8 years. I've been in Dubai for 8 years. So I've seen everything that you can imagine. To be honest, I'm very comfortable here. I feel like there is a good career path for me. I'm well respected in the company. I've built strong rapport. And it really goes back to being a multiplier. So I lost all my notes because I was too busy being a woman in business to attend the practice session, but I'm just gonna wing it, and because everything really comes from the heart for me. What is a multiplier? I heard this term a few years ago. I tried to Google it a bit, and I got all this information. It's a financial term, it's an accounting term, it's an economic term, but for me, what it means is just a person who is consistently investing in their own growth and also the growth of others. Why? Because a strong leader is not the one who is always shining alone. Your battle in life is not to be first, but it's to be first together as a community. And so for you to be able to do that, you need to invest in your own growth, and you need to invest in the growth of others so that you can all rise above together. So this can be done. I mean, specifically today, I'm talking about women in business because of what we just said, what we just heard. This is still a worldwide problem. And so it's everybody's job to try to close the gap, the pay gap, the inequality, the representation. We need more representation, not just for women, but different genders, different backgrounds, different orientations. We need more representation. We need big brands to make this move, and they're going in the right direction, but it has to be authentic. So let's go back to how you can do this on a day-to-day basis and why this is important for women. Society tells us many things, you know, growing up as women. Sometimes you think, yeah, but it depends on the place, it depends on the region. Not really. My experience and your experience could be very, very similar, even though we have had, you know, different upbringings, different experiences. Women are told the same thing in different ways. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's in the back of your mind. Sometimes you think that society is overcome it and everything is fine, but then you see things in the news or you hear things on the streets. I mean, I think we can all agree that there's still a lot to do for women's rights, and for me it starts with women really working together to invest in each other, and for me this is the basic, and this is how it should be done. So let me give you a few, before I go into a few examples of what I do, and I'm so sorry, I don't know if I'm going too fast or too slow, but the point of this is that you can be a multiplier regardless of your title. So me, I'm a marketing manager, but I was not always a marketing manager. I'm a regional manager, so I manage, you know, budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm leading a small team in the CSR committee, which I do on top of my job. I'm doing forecasts. I mean, there's so many things that I do which are part of my day-to-day, but I'm not a CEO. I'm not a, you know, director, but you don't have to be, and that's the point. You can be a multiplier. An intern can be a multiplier. Anyone can be a multiplier. It's really a vibe. It's a way that you live, and it's really about inspiring people. It's the most basic message that I have for you today, but it's just one of the most important messages, and it's what has made me successful in my company. It's what's given me the rapport, and to be honest, it's what's given me my confidence. I mean, I'm speaking to you right now. I can't see any of you. I'm literally speaking to just a screen with a camera, none of my notes, but I'm talking to you right now because it's an important thing. And you know, this is what comes with the confidence. When you change your mindset and you think of community and building a community, it becomes a passion project, and you're not working, you're not living to work. You know, you're working to live, and you're working to make real differences in people's lives and to see real change. So let's talk about, you know, certain examples. This is all great. This is all talk, but what have I done that I can talk to you about to show you real examples? In 2019, we started an employee committee at LVMH Beauty. So this is the beauty division in the Middle East. We have about, I would say, 300 back office employees, maybe throughout 7 different brands. It could be even more because we're growing. And the point of this was we had employees who said, you know what, we need to make a change. We need to have a CSR committee. This is such an amazing brand, such an amazing umbrella, but there's so much for us to do in the Middle East. How can we do it? Even though there's a logistics guy, there's a marketing girl, there's a junior doing visual merchandising, it didn't matter. We came together, of course, with the help of our human resources, because they created the environment for it. And we said, let's start a committee, let's set a plan, let's set a budget, let's make a real difference in our community. And one of the pillars, so we did a little survey for our company, just the employees, and we asked them, guys, what do you care about? What, you know, makes your heart beat? What do you want to see? What change do you want to see? And it was a simple question. And with this, we found that the 4 pillars that mattered the most to them were children education and welfare, women empowerment, and then we also had environment and health concerns. So taking this survey, we understood what matters to the real employees. And this is not a top management decision. This is the everyday employee and what matters to them and what changes they want to see. So we formed the committee together. It was, I mean, really legitimate stuff. You know, that we did this in 2019, right before COVID hit. So we had a lot of speed bumps on the way. We were just getting the momentum. Everyone was excited. COVID hit, you know, we had all these regulations of what charity you can give to, how you can help. You know, everyone thought the world was ending. I mean, there was a lot of vagueness going on, but we did a very professional structure. We created our own governance. We went to the general managers and we told them, okay guys, we're an employee committee, but obviously we need your sign off. We also need a budget from you. So we're going to meet twice a year, and these are the brands represented, and we're going to present to you, blah, 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 and all of these things. We're going to have a proper budget. We have a finance person to follow through. And how is this tied to being a multiplier? All of these people in the committee, they were so passionate about it. And they were not getting paid for this, because this is not a CSR job. Nobody has the title of CSR. Nobody has a title of community outreach in our company. We're all normal employees who are putting in extra time to make a difference, because we believe in the multiplying effect. We believe that if we put in a little, all of us together, that the ripple effect will be so huge, and that we will be so happy to be good people. We want to be good people, and good people need to plant the seed for other good people to grow, and just to create this good vibes, basically. So just a quick example, I mean, you saw that two of our pillars, one of them was children education and the other one was women empowerment. So for the women empowerment specifically, because it's so tied into to the talk today, we worked hand in hand with one of the shelters in the country that provides support for women and children who have unfortunately been in domestic violence situations, and also human trafficking. So these are extremely sensitive, stigmatized, taboo topics in general, but you can imagine even more in the Middle East, in our region. It's such a difficult topic to talk about openly, because to be honest, no one really knows how to start, how to react, how to build on it. Nobody even knows that these organizations existed. We were actually shocked when we did the research. We picked a partner. We said we want a long-term partnership with this organization. We went over, I mean, we met some of the women and children, and I can't tell you the feeling we had when we saw the kids. Like, I'm getting emotional right now. We took some candy, we saw the kids, but it wasn't just about that. We said, how can we help you? Other than just giving money, we want to be involved with you, because again, we want to be multipliers. We're not here just for a check. We want to make a difference. So we had the World Expo in Dubai. I'm not sure if you guys heard about it. It's something that happens every 5 years around the world. It's been in Dubai it's a 6-month situation. It's a massive, massive project for the country and for the region. And we sponsored the organization. They had already an artwork that all of the women in the shelter had worked on. So the artwork is basically, you can see on the bottom left of the screen, like a bowling alley and a big ball. And on the bowling ball, it says Al-Haya. Haya means life. So and all the women represented, you know, different women from different backgrounds who have been knocked down by the hardships of life, by other people, by people trying to bring them down. And the idea of it was that just as when you play bowling, once you throw the ball, you hit the strike, the pins fall down, there is support to bring the pins back up. And the idea of this is that the community around these people is the support that can help them stand back up. So the whole thing was painted by these women. We said we need to do an exhibit at the expo to raise awareness for domestic violence, I mean, against domestic violence, and also the human trafficking issue, and for the organization as well, so that people can be more aware and more engaged with this stigmatized topic for women in our region. Again, we didn't just throw money at it. We had, you know, the people in the committee with different backgrounds, visual merchandising, architectural backgrounds, submit different ideas for how to protect this art piece at the expo. Now remember, Dubai is not, you know, the coldest place. It's pretty warm. It gets a bit dusty sometimes. So they had to think of all the specific ways of how to make it interactive, but still to protect the space, to protect the art, and to protect the message and raise awareness on this topic. So I was extremely, extremely proud of this team. And again, these people are doing this on top of their day-to-day job. And let me tell you, our jobs are hectic. I mean, I got here from work at 8:30 p.m. to sign in on this Zoom call at 9 p.m. So we are working day and night on our normal day-to-day job, but what fuels us is making a difference and being a multiplier. I'll give you another example as well. It's And please, guys, interrupt me if I'm going overboard, because again, I'm really not paying attention to any of the notes or any of the timing. So feel free to jump in, but I'm almost done, don't worry. Let's go into what we have done for children education. We worked closely with one of the schools in Dubai. It's a massive facility that offers specialized education for children with different needs. In this country, we refer to it as people of determination. We never use other terms because these people have gotten, a different end of the stick. We are blessed. We work in luxury. We need to give back. And so we were proud, we did so many initiatives to raise money for the children, and we raise it to cover the tuition for the families who are unable to pay for the specialized education of their children, especially when COVID hit. A lot of people lost their jobs. The children, needed the tuition to be covered to continue to go to this specific school. So we raised, I did the math today because we were nominated for an award as well in our company. We raised $100,000. And guys, maybe it's not a lot for you, but in 2019, we raised zero. We didn't even have a CSR committee. We had nothing. So to go from 2019 being what is CSR to coming now to the beginning of 2022 and me being able to tell you like very proudly, we have raised $100,000 for children. We have supported 6 children to go to the school to get the education they need, because again, we want to be multipliers. We want to give them the tools so that then they could grow, they could also continue to make a difference in their communities, and we need to be inclusive. They are part of us and we are part of them. Finally, to also be inclusive, we do internal projects. So we try to get all the employees involved, and we say, guys, you're not here just for work. I'm sure you're talented. Some of you have hidden talents. Some of you like to draw. Some of you like to make candles with your children, whatever it is. Let's do a little fair where we highlight your talents, sell it between each other within the company. This way people get to know each other, but also all of the money goes to a good cause and goes towards the children, either the children in the shelters and their mothers, or the children in the children of determination. Sustainability, I mean, we also did, it was the peak of COVID, so we said we don't want to keep using 3 different masks, disposing of them every day. We made these reusable masks for the office. Again, this might seem like very baby stuff to you, but 2019 we had nothing. So we really, I mean, went from 0 to hero in 2 years. I'm very proud of the team. Yeah, and this takes me to the end of this presentation. So I'll leave you just with one thing, and it's one of the things I had prepared to say earlier today for our nomination. You need to wake up every day realizing, regardless of whatever life has thrown your way, you're still blessed. And for this reason, remind yourself other people have it way worse than you. So you need to take action, regardless of your title, regardless of your occupation, whatever you're doing, you can make a difference, but it's much easier to do it in a group. And to do it in a group, you need to know how to motivate people. You need to find passionate people. You need to invest in them, but don't forget, you have to also invest in yourself, because if you put yourself in the back burner, you will never grow and you will never be able to continue to be a multiplier and to create more multipliers. So thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, find me on LinkedIn. So my name on LinkedIn, just type in Yara Moosa, Y-A-R-A space M-O-O-S-A. Add me and we can have a chat anytime.
Thank you, Yara. Our next speaker is Alia Ibrahim. Her talk is From Reporting on the Field to Reinventing the Newsroom as a Businesswoman. Based in Lebanon, Alia is co-founder and CEO of Adoración, an independent digital media platform. She has spent the majority of her career reporting from the Middle East and around the world. Noticing a need for a new media platform, Alia entered the world of business and launched her own company in November 2017. Previously, Alia was senior correspondent at Al Arabiya News Channel. Her opinion and news stories have appeared in a number of publications, including the Washington Post, where she was a contributing reporter between 2005 and 2011. Since 2016, she has been an instructor of journalism at the Lebanese American University. Alia, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. It's such an honor to be here. I'm inspired really by the speakers. Yara, it's heartwarming to see a young business person speaking with such vitality. Really, it makes not my day, it really can make my week. So I know initially I said I don't have slides to share, but very quickly I want to share those slides. Okay, so this, very quickly, I'll go after this. It's in French and it's supposed to be an album of how much I've done in reporting. And I think it just gives you an idea about the title of this presentation. It's I've been a journalist exactly since 1996, since I graduated from school. I always thought I was always going to be a journalist, never thought that I'll find myself on the business side of things. And I'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is to show you that until 2016, I really thought that I was going to do this part, the reporting part, the field part of journalism for the rest of my life. I'll go back now to telling you how my story ended up being, and I'll start with a confession actually. The confession is that I still have a little bit of an issue considering myself a businesswoman. And it's really not because I don't think I'm good at what I do or I'm not a good businesswoman, but because as the slides before that showed you, I first and foremost, I still, and at heart, I still consider myself a journalist. And I saying that because I think it's this passion, this love that I have for my previous career for journalism that makes me very good at being a business person. To make the story a little bit easy to grasp, I think I would say that throughout those last 4 years, this career of mine passed through 4 very important milestones. And I say that because I think that for women especially, I mean, this is my personal experience, but the more I encounter women in the world of business, the more I see a lot of similarities on those paths. For me, the milestones started with loss, really big loss. And after the loss came opportunity and motivation together. And then there was experience and what I have done previously in my life and how this helped me be a business person. And I think the moment where I am now is the confidence that I am growing into being a leader and a business person. So I'll try over this time to go over those 4 headlines. Loss, it's really my story, my personal story, as much as it is the story of my business. Daraj is the company that I founded, that I co-founded, and that I lead as an independent media that I, along with other journalists, launched in 2017. We had started working on it a year earlier, so 1 year in preparation and brainstorming and writing business models, etc. And then the launch in November 2017. We were a group of journalists who were dealing with a huge amount of disappointments and frustrations and losses. The reason why the word Daraj literally in Arabic means stairway. And it's a name that we had chosen one afternoon in a coffee shop as we were discussing how bad our professional lives have turned. And not only our professional lives, the balance in our life was just horrible. And we just wanted this small stairway that would help us get out of the deep hole that we found ourselves in, even if it's a little step at a time, upward, hopefully. Even when we said the name, some people said a stairway could be downward or upward. Our idea was just get out of the deep hole because there wasn't a downward for us at this point. At that point, we were all working for leading mainstream media companies. And in light of how badly the Arab Spring had derailed, we started feeling that as journalists, not only we were not helping improve our societies, we were becoming part of the problem rather than being part of the solutions. Let me be clear, the situation when it comes to media was never perfect, because the media in the Arab world is always politically funded. It's always government, if it's even the private media is funded by businesses that are affiliated with the governments. In 2011, like everybody else, we felt when the Arab Spring was happening in the Arab world, we felt that things were promising to get better. And to be honest, they did for a while. I myself covered all the demonstrations and all the revolutions in Yemen, in Syria. I didn't go to Syria, I went later when it got a little bit more complicated. But I went to Tunis, to Yemen, to Egypt. We really had big hopes. 6 years later, Syria, which was promising to overthrow a dictatorship, had turned into a war. The situation in Yemen was most difficult for us because it was unfolding as the biggest tragic human story in the world. And we were at the time working for media that was taking side with the alliances. So it was really very difficult for us. I think it's important to say, when you're a journalist in that part, working in that system, you cannot really separate the personal from the professional. So when you can't be working on this kind of coverage and separate your social life, your family life from what you're seeing, from what you're witnessing, especially when you're frustrated about what you yourself are contributing as a journalist. So as individuals, we were feeling that we really had no control over anything. We did not have control over our emotions to begin with. To us, it really meant that we had to start something on our own. And I think if it weren't for that amount of frustration at all levels, I mean, I could speak for hours about how bad this has turned in every way, family level, social level, everything. So it was from that moment on that we started seeing opportunities. Our hypothesis was that the problem in the Arab world was never a problem of good journalists or their existence or good journalism. The problem was always in the ownership of the media. And we started, one very important thing that has happened throughout our careers was that how much the costs of production has been reduced over time. So in that sense, I belong to the generation where the price of a camera that we used to go out and film was in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. To go live from a location, I remember the price of the minute was in thousands of dollars because at the time it was satellite. In 2016, this was a changing point where you could actually produce a film using your telephone. The costs of production have made it possible for journalists to start thinking about creating their own media. And there was an appetite. This was the beginning of the opportunity. And the beginning of our conversations with investors who were interested in creating new media companies in the Arab world. The beginning of it was to think about what kind of media we wanted to create. And really here, it's very important to talk about this issue about becoming the business person. Very early on during the conversation with our investors, it became very clear that if we're going to talk to business people, then we have to speak their language. And it became very clear that unless one of the journalists on board became the CEO of a company, the investors were going to introduce a CEO of their own. And this was our biggest fear. We did not want a business person to come and run our media. We wanted one of us. We wanted a journalist who understands the industry more than anybody else to take over the leadership in the sense of creating a business, basically. 2 points here are very important to make. I think in everybody's mind, we were 3 founders, 2 women and 1 journalist colleague who's our friend. In everybody's mind, in the investor's mind, the CEO was de facto the male colleague. And it just happened that he himself was not interested in being the CEO, and this has become the choice of either of the two other co-founders. But it's important to know that the first idea that came to everybody's mind was that out of three, it was the natural thing was for the man to be the CEO. I'll be honest and I'll say that at the beginning, the term CEO was not one that I was reconciled with. It was not easy to say I am CEO because I am a journalist. But with time, I learned that to be able, not only I have to accept it, I have to embrace it, and I have to believe it to be able to do good business. Now, at that point, what we decided to do was our business model was really very easy. But to me personally, when the conversation, after a few weeks of conversation with our investors, and it became clear that I was the one who was going to write a pitch deck, and I was the one who was going to present, and I was the one who was going to argue and negotiate and all these things. It really meant that I had to go back and study. And for 6 months, all I did was read books, some of them very old, that I had left from earlier years in my life, and some of them, like everything, all the new literature about startups and all these things. What was funny for me was that in college, I had enrolled in business for just 1 semester, and I really hated it. I was out of school and out of faculty and out of major in just 1 semester. And the semester after, I enrolled in political science and had to be on the dean's list to be able to go back to the Faculty of Arts and Science. I'm saying this to say that in 2016, I really pulled back those textbooks that I still had, and I had to learn what writing a budget looks like, what a feasibility study is, in addition to all the new terms that have to do with sustainability and revenue streams and all of these things that like a year earlier was not only alien, they were all really negative. They all held negative connotations for me. So and I have to say, I mean, I remember those long nights where I would study at the beginning, and then I started actually writing my vision and the vision of my co-founders. It was really like writing a dream. This amazing newsroom that we think we greatly believed in. All the research, I think here also, because I'm a good journalist, I have very good research skills, I have good communication skills, and it helped in my new business. Reading about, with time, I was very convinced. I mean, for us, the idea was very simple. To be independent as a media, we really have to be successful as a business. We know only too well that journalism is a very expensive industry, and it's at the same time a very especially investigative journalism, which is the journalism that we produce, it's not very lucrative. So our business model was that we do impact-driven journalism, investigative journalism that we called our signature journalism, and then we do commercially driven content, which is more on the lifestyle and on which also in the Arab world, in our language, was very much in demand. Why? Because we think that we live in the Arab world where taboos are really very rarely you would find content that is cultural content, especially, that is talking about taboos in a decent way, in a non-provocative way, in a non-sensational way, in a way that could add to the conversation that is happening in the communities, and that it would make sense. That we could monetize this type of content. Now, it's very important to look, and these are all things that I was learning about, because again, I had to build the argument for our business. Arabic language is the fastest growing language on the internet. The Arabic language is one of the least served languages on the internet. In other words, there's only 1% of content in Arabic on the internet, for 6% of the international population, of the internet population. This was really big, a big demand for content that we can produce. In our hypothesis, we had a network of some of the best writers and best journalists and best content producers from around the world. Long story short, we presented this pitch after, and it was really a heavy document. For our investors, it was they were very interested in the commercially driven part of it, of the proposal, but they thought that it was impossible to do the two together, that you cannot produce, in the Arab world at least, investigative journalism, which is most likely going to expose public official people and this is part of what we say. Our role as a media is first and foremost to hold the powerful into account, to investigate corruption, to provide coverage for the underreported. These were all things that would make us kind of the enemies of the current regimes. We argued otherwise. We really argued that if you want to do business in this part of the world, you have really good reasons to promote this kind of journalism, because without good journalism and good judiciary, you cannot even do business. Anyway, the idea was that what we proposed, and this is again something that you learn along the way, even a no is not really a no. A no became we will do a proof of concept for 3 years. We will assure that one particular hypothesis is correct. If we produce high quality journalism, there is a demand for it. Because for our investors, they were not convinced that people are interested. Arabs, there is this saying that Arabs don't read and they don't want to read. They're interested only in fluff, etc., etc. Our hypothesis was that Arabs don't read because they're not being proposed, like there's no supply for good content for them to read. And this is how we started approaching, we invested our own money. We produced a documentary, and then all the money we made from a documentary that we sold to a third party, we put as seed money in our company, and then we raised in grants the balance for that, to launch our media. Daraj was one of the first media to be funded by international donors. That was a company. We are not an NGO. We had to make this argument we have to negotiate with some of our donors, because usually they are used to fund non-profit organizations. And I think this is something that we had learned speaking to investors. If we really truly wanted to be independent, then we have to think about sustainability. Even today, we don't, as a model, as a policy, we're very transparent. We post everything, all the money. If we're embarrassed to say we have received money from a donor, we just don't take the money. So, and we think this is part of our business model as well, because this is part of how we build our credibility for our audiences.
Alia, I have to interrupt you for a second. We've come to the end of our time. If you want to wrap up with a closing remark, that would be.
I'm sorry. Okay, sure, no worries. It's just like I'll very quickly skip to the last 2 points, and I'm sorry if I spoke longer than my time. I really think that the important point is the 2 very quick points. My experience, what I had learned in the newsroom, the way that I as a woman never did the fight, for example, for the pay to be paid the same as my colleagues. These are things that I have brought with me to my new business. Today, 75% of our newsroom are women, and it changes the energy inside, and they're all paid. I think all of them are paid. We have gender balanced pay in the newsroom. And the last point I want to make is this confidence, saying that I have learned everything that I have learned through my career. I continue to love this path that I have chosen, but being on the other side of the equation, being on the business side of the equation has been an incredibly and sometimes even more rewarding experience. It's no longer only my career that I'm shaping, it's the career of hundreds of journalists who today are part of our newsroom. I'm very happy to see that many of those are women. And I really hope that by creating newsrooms that are led by women, we are contributing to something that could have good impact in the future.
Thank you, Alia. Our next speaker is Ezgi Kaya. She will speak on understanding the gender pay gap. Dr. Kaya is a lecturer in economics at Cardiff University and a fellow at the Global Labor Organization. Her expertise is in the area of empirical labor economics. She has worked on a variety of policy relevant issues, but has a particular interest in gender equality in the labor market. Dr. Kaya, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks a lot, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. And thank you, Deborah, for this kind introduction. And also thanks to all organizers for the invitation and for organizing this series of interesting talks. So the first part of my talk today will focus on the key facts about the gender pay gap. I will show you a series of figures, mostly based on data from European countries, but also across the globe. And I will try to highlight what are the common patterns and potential drivers of the gender wage gaps that we observe. And in the second part of my talk, I will discuss the measurement issues and the strategies that are commonly adopted to address the gender pay gap that we observe. Perhaps the most striking fact is the presence of a substantial gender pay gap in most countries. So the figure here presents the cross-sectional data from a sample of European countries. Each bar here represents the estimate for each country, which corresponds to differences between average hourly earnings of men and women, expressed as a percentage of average hourly earnings of men. Here we are looking at all workers, irrespective of their characteristics or whether they work part-time or full-time. As we can see, in most countries, the gap is positive. That is, women earn less than men, and there are large differences in the size of this gap across countries. For example, if we look at European Union average as a whole in 2019, women's gross hourly earnings were on average 14.1% below those of men, and the figure is quite similar in the Euro area as well. So the EU average is slightly smaller than the US figure, which corresponds to 20%. However, what we see is a substantial variation across countries, partly due to varying female labor force participation rates, as well as different institutional and cultural environments. So how is the gap changing over time? To answer this question, let's consider this figure. This shows us the available estimates from a sample of European countries as well as the US. The estimates here come from a different data source, so the measurement is slightly different, but the message is the same. So we see a positive gap over time for the sample of countries that we are looking at. But what we also see is that the gap has decreased in the last couple of decades across all the countries that we are looking at. But in most OECD countries that are not included in this figure, we see similar trends. In some cases, the reduction is remarkable. For example, for the UK, the dark blue solid line here, gap went down from almost 50% in 1970s to about 17% in 2016. Despite having fallen in recent decades, there still remains a substantial pay gap between men and women. But what does gender pay gap look like if we focus on different points of the pay distribution? Do we find any evidence of the so-called glass ceiling, that is a wider gender pay gap at the top of the distribution in this context? The figure that I show you here allows us to answer this question by showing the data again for various OECD countries. The closed triangle here represents the gender pay gap at the top end of the pay distribution, and the open square shows the gap among the lowest paid. The figure shows us that the gender pay gaps are often widest among the top earners, reflecting the difficulty for women to advance in labor markets. For instance, if we look at the OECD average here, the difference between the gap at the top and at the bottom end of the pay distribution is about 10 percentage points, indicating a glass ceiling effect for women that they face in the labor market. Obviously, these aggregate pay gaps might underestimate the extent of the gender pay gap across different groups. In fact, the empirical evidence suggests that gender pay gap varies to a great extent for different groups of workers. For instance, women are found to be overrepresented in part-time jobs, perhaps as a consequence of the traditional household division of labor, which typically carries a lower accepted wage rate than full-time work. In this figure, the gender pay gap is analyzed from the perspective of part-time or full-time employment, again, for a sample of European countries. The orange bar here represents the gender pay gap among part-time men and women, while the blue bar is the estimate for full-time workers. What we see is that in 2019, the gender pay gap for part-time workers varied from around -5% in Italy to 22% in Croatia. A minus gender pay gap means that on average, women's gross hourly earnings are higher than those of men. However, this is often due to a selection bias that we call, especially when the employment rate is lower for women than for men. In other words, women engaging in the labor market may have comparatively higher skills and education levels than men, and as a result, we observe a negative gender pay gap. Another dimension that appears to be important in the context of gender pay gap is public versus private sector. In the majority of European countries, the gender pay gap is found to be wider in the private sector than that in the public sector. For instance, as illustrated in this figure with an orange bar, in 2019, the majority of the European countries recorded a higher gender pay gap in the private sector than in the public sector. The academic evidence put forward several potential explanations to explain why this might be the case. These include distinctive nature of the public sector in holding cultural values as a fair employer and offering greater provision of flexible working and family-friendly practices. There may also be indirect effects due to centralized pay setting, collective bargaining, more transparent and structured pay systems within the public sector, which may then influence the pay distribution and hence the gender pay gap that we observe. Today, pay differences are much better explained by differences in occupations that men and women are employed in than, for instance, by education. In fact, this is consistent with the evidence from the US. Since education expanded significantly over the last few decades, it has become less important in explaining gender differences in pay. However, we also know that there's substantial variation in pay gap between occupations. In an earlier work for the UK, where we examined the gender pay gap in the UK public sector occupations, what we found was a substantial variation across public sector occupations. For instance, in the figure, I try to illustrate the pay gap among selected public sector occupations. For instance, the first blue bar here shows the pay gap among doctors and dentists, which is about 20%, and this is around 4 times that of workers in the National Health Service. The last dimension I would like to emphasize is age. The pay gap is generally much lower for new labor market entrants and tends to widen with age. However, those differences over age groups can have different patterns across the countries as illustrated in this figure. Here, what we did is that we calculated the gender pay gap for different age brackets for a sample of European countries. What we observe here as a common pattern is that there are important differences by age within each country. But the second point might be a little bit more crucial in understanding the pay gap. What we see is that the gender pay gap is a statistic that changes over the life cycle of a worker. In most European countries, as well as in the US, it's small when formal education ends and employment begins, and it increases with age. The gap might increase with age as a result of the career interruptions women may experience during their working life, particularly when they marry and when or if they have children. It's also important here to note that gender pay gap is a metric that tells us the difference in pay between men and women. It's a measure of inequality and captures a concept that's broader than the concept of equal pay for equal work. As we have seen in the figures that we just looked at, differences in pay between men and women may capture differences along many possible dimensions, including working hours, age, sector of employment, and occupation. When the gender pay gap is calculated by comparing all male workers to all female workers, irrespective of these gender differences, the result is the raw or unadjusted pay gap. On the contrary, when the gap is calculated after accounting for underlying differences in characteristics, then the result is the adjusted pay gap. The implication is that observing differences in pay between men and women is neither necessary nor sufficient to prove discrimination in the workplace. Both are important concepts, but discrimination and inequality are not one and not the same. However, we have econometric tools that often enable us to estimate an unexplained gap. That is, we are able to look at the gender pay difference for observationally equivalent men and women. And the figure now I show you is from the Statistical Office of the European Union, Eurostat, and it shows the evolution of this unexplained gender pay gap in European Union countries. Here, we are looking at men and women with similar labor market characteristics. When countries are ranked according to their unexplained gender pay gap, the picture changes compared to the raw gender pay gap figures that I showed you previously, with some countries moving by more than 10 positions after taking into account these gender differences in characteristics. Nevertheless, at EU level, the unexplained gender pay gap is around 11.4%. This means that women still earn less than men on average after correcting for their different average characteristics. Many factors may drive the wage gap that we observe, but there is no one straightforward solution to close it. In the European Union, there is a broad policy strategy to foster gender equality that's common across its member states. And the key elements of this strategy include family-friendly labor market policies to improve access to childcare facilities and paid leave. These are known to boost women's labor force participation. There have been also attempts to equalize the gender distribution of unpaid care work, including getting fathers more involved in caring and promoting more equal forms of paid leave. Efforts to reduce segregation in the labor market also aim to address issues around concentration of women in low-paid occupations and firms and at low-paid grades or positions within organizations. Equal pay laws and anti-discrimination laws have been crucial for ensuring workers' rights and exist widely throughout the OECD countries. As part of these efforts to close gender pay gaps, Many countries are also implementing promising new pay transparency tools. These include employer pay gap reporting, equal pay audits, and job classification systems. These measures offer a relatively simple tool to identify and address organizational pay gaps, but their design and implementation matter. For instance, in the UK, since 2017, large organizations are required to calculate and publicly report their organizational pay gap. And this is part of a strategy to make pay gaps more transparent and encourage employers to explore and address its drivers. In fact, UK is not an exception. In 18 OECD countries, we see a systematic and regular gender pay gap reporting by private sector firms. Within this group, 9 countries implemented more comprehensive legislations that require additional gender data analysis and typically propose follow-up strategies to address inequalities. Most of these policies were introduced in the past decades, and most of this movement took place in Europe. Many of these pay reporting covered the public sector as well. And additionally, in some other countries, we see job classification systems. These attempt to standardize pay and make it transparent across men and women within specific job categories. So these systems are often embedded within equal pay auditing processes, suggesting that they may become more widespread if pay auditing policies gain momentum. Because most pay transparency policies are relatively new, there has been limited academic research carried out evaluating their effectiveness. So the available evidence has largely concentrated on company pay reporting regulations. These studies have typically found small reductions in the gender pay gap when reporting measures are accompanied by the threat of sanctions or relatively high public visibility, as is the case in the UK as well as in Denmark. However, where enforcement mechanism or pay gap visibility is weaker, these measures seem to have had fewer positive effects. However, studies looking at smaller and targeted populations of workers, such as university faculty in Canada and the United States, have found that publishing salaries helps to close the gender pay gap. I would like to conclude my talk noting that although the academic evidence base is still being built, pay transparency policies hold significant appeal, and pay transparency measures represent a tool both to identify and to take action against the wage gap in the workplace. However, the preliminary evidence suggests that their design and implementation really matter. This concludes my presentation, and thank you for your attention. And I think I will hand over to Deborah.
Thank you, Dr. Kaya. Our next speaker is Jamie Schumacher from Local Initiatives Support Corporation, Twin Cities. She will discuss the importance of storytelling in business. Jamie Schumacher, public artist and author of Butterflies and Tall Bikes, traded the warm beaches of Southern California for the snowy lake shores of Minnesota. Her goal was to find an affordable place to live where arts, culture, and community could coexist. She earned a master's degree from the University of Minnesota in Innovation Nonprofit Management. While working as the executive director of the West Bank Business Association, Jamie helped secure Cedar Riverside's role among Minneapolis's city-designated cultural districts. The West Bank neighborhood in Minneapolis is home to more than 200 businesses, many of them immigrant and BIPOC owned. She now works with LISC Twin Cities, building the capacity of the more than 24 cultural and creative districts of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I'll hand it over to Jamie now.
Thank you. Are you able to see my slides? Great. So thanks everybody. Thanks also to the previous presenters, and thanks for folks joining us for the lightning round. With my presentation, I'm going to be mixing it up a little. I will be discussing the importance of story and storytelling in business. So my name is Jamie Schumacher. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a multiracial woman. I've got brown hair and I'm wearing a traditional Polish blouse. I'll be talking a little bit about what you see on the screen as well as we go through for accessibility. On screen, you see a photo of me. I'm wearing a box on my head. The markings on the box make me look, makes what looks like a happy face. I work currently as a program officer for Twin Cities LISC. I get to work with the cultural districts in the Twin Cities. I'm also an author and an artist. The image on screen now shows a series of paintings, brightly colored paintings, and 2 book covers. So in making my art and in writing my books, I've had people tell me that my story doesn't matter, or my book or art or the things I have to say would be more valuable if my narrative was extracted from it. But I really think that who I am in my story is critical to both my art and the work that I do every day. So that's why I'm going to be talking a little bit about the importance of storytelling. So I'm the daughter of 2 immigrants, an aspect of my life that continues to shape me. The images on screen now show my parents, who I think are adorable. My mother is a young girl in Poland, my parents together in their apartment in New York, and my father is a young man. My father is Sri Lankan, my mom is Polish, and you know, each of their stories, each of their lives could be a story worthy of its own book. I will say that the situation right now in Ukraine is weighing heavily on my heart, but I am very, very grateful that we have opportunities like today to come together, meet one another, and learn from each other and share our stories. I was the first person in my family to graduate with a 4-year degree and the daughter of immigrants. This is not unusual. I was, of course, working several jobs all throughout college, you know, waitress, receptionist, makeup artist. I moved to Minnesota here in the Twin Cities in 2003, and I started a nonprofit art gallery. Currently on screen are photos of me at various jobs, painting a mask, sitting at the couch at the gallery and behind a computer. So, you know, some things never change. I finished my master's degree here at the University of Minnesota, and I continued working with the arts community here in Minneapolis. And at one point I thought all these paths were pretty disparate, but I realized there is a coalescence. And, you know, I've been working at this intersection of art and community and culture. And at the heart of it all is people and our stories. So I'm going to tell you one of my favorite unbelievable stories. So on screen now you see an image of the Sri Lankan mountains. This is Nora Elia, and these are tea leaves. This is a field of tea leaves. So largely due to the ongoing civil war and the cost of travel, my dad didn't return to Sri Lanka until much later in life. I was in my 30s and my dad and I went together with my mom and a small caravan of family. While we were there, we spent lots of times with relatives. And one night at my aunt's house, my cousins also happened to be there visiting from Botswana on their break. The oldest was talking and my auntie asked him, "So Sandesh, are you coming again with your sisters next year?" And he said, "No, I'm going to be getting ready for college." And he was looking at law schools all across the world. And Carlson, being one of the best, was on his list. You know, fast forward a year and a half later, and he's here in Minnesota, and I'm dropping off a care package of curry to him at his place during finals week. So I just want to recap that story. My Sri Lankan cousin from Botswana, who I happened to connect with on that one particular night in Sri Lanka, while we happened to be traveling there at the same time, you know, we happened to talk about our future plans and share our stories, and that led to a wonderful connection here in Minneapolis. And it's just a continual reminder that it really is such a small, small world. And our culture, our family, and our relationships, they take us on a path that keeps us all connected. The image you see on screen now is my cousin Sandesh, me and my husband Nick. Also, I have to say, you know, I walk around every day feeling like pretty normal, but then I see photos or stand next to my husband in a mirror and I remember I am not a tall person by any definition. Moving along, I'm going to talk a little bit now about the West Bank Business Association and my work that I did with the businesses there. Prior to my current role, I had the opportunity to work in this incredible neighborhood that you see here. This is an aerial view of the West Bank. You can see the Cedar Riverside Towers there. This Sambusa-shaped wedge is bordered on one side by the 35 freeway, the 94 freeway on another side, and the Mississippi River. Within that little wedge, we had a hospital, 3 universities, 200 businesses, apartments, condos, single-family homes, dorms, 2 light rail stations, high bus, religious institutions, including mosques and churches, cultural centers, music venues, bars, grocery stores. I'm going to transition now to an illustrated map of the West Bank done by artist Kevin Cannon. And it This neighborhood is a miracle that all these things exist together simultaneously. And of those businesses in the neighborhood, 95% are locally owned and operated, many by women. And have you ever seen anything like it, where you can step into a neighborhood and every single aspect of it is unique? In the role that I was tasked with, we worked to grow the capacity of the organization to do our work and increase our relationships with other organizations. This neighborhood was pretty isolated because the freeways and the river dividing us from other parts of the city. So we really worked to try to rebuild those connections with other places so that our neighborhood was a part of the decisions that happened that affected us and not just impacted by them. On screen now, you just see some of the awesome West Bank businesses, cooperatively owned cafe, a bar, the district signage. With businesses, we worked to prevent their displacement. And what that means is to make sure all those incredible, unique businesses could stay put in the neighborhood if they wanted to. So I want to share with you next is the story of one woman-owned business in particular. You see, as I mentioned, this is largely an immigrant neighborhood. The West Bank is a gateway community in many ways. Many times people arrive in Minneapolis, which is a sanctuary city, and they'll find affordable housing on the West Bank. Sometimes they'll start their own business. With the light rail, job opportunities open up in surrounding districts and cities. Oftentimes their kids go to one of the many universities in the neighborhood. Currently, the West Bank is home to a large number of Somali and Oromo residents, among others from East Africa. And prior to that, the West Bank was home to a large number of mostly Asian residents, Korean families, Hmong, Chinese, to name a few. One of the cornerstone businesses still in the West Bank is Kiefer Court Bakery and Cafe. And the image on screen now shows the cafe. So this is a Chinese family-owned restaurant and bakery. And though the landscape of the neighborhood has shifted some in time in terms of who lives in the neighborhood, this space remains a destination for many in the area, as well as students coming from other countries. And it's a mainstay of the Asian community in Minnesota, from birthday cakes to congee. On screen right now is Michelle. This restaurant is family owned. The Kwan family has owned and operated this restaurant for decades. Sunny and Pauline raised their 4 kids in the apartment upstairs above the space you can see here. As part of the planned transition, they were turning the restaurant and operations over to their youngest daughter, Michelle. And on screen, you see me and Michelle, reminding you again, I'm not a tall person. Michelle is a young Chinese American woman, and we are both smiling in this photo. And Michelle, she's a connector in the community. She went to the U, she participates on boards and committees, and she stops at the local bars. She grew up with this busy business district as her playground, riding her bike in the cul-de-sac behind the restaurant, drinking pineapple juice at the neighboring bar. And we were faced with the question, what could we do to help support this business during the transition to make sure they could stay and thrive as a cornerstone in the neighborhood? What we did was we helped by providing support, technical assistance, redoing their website, creating videos for significant events like the Mid-Autumn Festival, and providing social media support that helped them tell their story. On screen right now is the Kiefer Court website with the clever hashtag, which translates pretty well into the character nice buns. And we tried to find ways for Kiefer Court not just to share their product, but their story. That's what people connected with. And it helped people not just want to come through their doors, but to come back again and again. Kiefer Court has a large wall that's next to the main avenues, Cedar and Riverside. Frequently tagged, they tried to find ways to reduce graffiti. They had an older mural that was crumbling and needed to be redone, so we worked with them to design and create a new mural that also helped share their story. So on screen now you see the mural. The 2 mallards, Sunny and Pauline, represent their marital happiness, and the other birds are chosen from where the 4 children were born, respectively Canada and Minnesota. And the shifting scene from night to day represents the passing of time and the transition of business. From year to year, prior to COVID, we had a 95% retention rate in the district. And this in an environment where our neighboring districts were seeing wild turnover. Post-COVID, Kiefer Court is still thriving and Michelle is still doing great. I'm going to rewind a little bit further. On screen is a blank slide, and that's intentional. When I first arrived to this role, The website history all started with the immigrant story. And personally, that's the story that resonates with me. I connect with that, both of my parents being immigrants. But the West Bank story doesn't begin there, right? Minnesota has a particularly complicated history in our relationship with the indigenous peoples here. And long before the West Bank was an immigrant sanctuary with an active commercial corridor, the West Bank neighborhood was a hub for trade and commerce in the Native American community. But we weren't talking about that as an organization, and we hadn't been including that in our story. If you look at the businesses and residents of the West Bank, it's actually even lower than the county average. We had no Native-owned businesses, and we had few to any Native American residents in our neighborhood. So we asked ourselves, how is the immigrant story? It's one that prides itself on diversity and vibrancy, but how is our story culpable of erasure and perpetuation of that Indigenous erasure that was happening in the Twin Cities? So we worked to shift that. And while we worked to shift the business landscape, we started with a narrative on our site and being more honest about where the West Bank story actually begins. In my current role at LISC, I have the great pleasure of working with the cultural and creative districts in the Twin Cities, and that includes the American Indian Cultural Corridor, and it's just down the road on Franklin. We host a cohort of cultural districts and provide them with capacity building support, technical assistance, and what my job before was to do with businesses, I now get to do for the organizations that support the districts as a whole. So in 2020, here in the Twin Cities, we experienced what we call the dual pandemic. We were not just dealing with COVID, but we also had the uprising following the murder of Mr. George Floyd. At LISC, in our efforts to help, we administered a lot of grants and technical assistance to small local businesses, in particularly women and Black-owned businesses who were disproportionately impacted by both events. We were also able to laser focus some of the grants into areas of high need. So during COVID, Indigenous businesses were hit particularly hard. Many of them are artist and trade-based businesses. We worked with two partners, the Minnesota Fund and the Native American Community Development Institute, to support their ongoing operations and to provide grants to Indigenous businesses specifically. Throughout all of that is storytelling. All My Relations Art Gallery in the Twin Cities shares the works of local artists and authors. They have storytelling circles, and they're doing all this work through the pandemic. For example, last year, they presented Seed Week, which was a week-long virtual celebration of seeds and storytelling through art, music, storytelling, and more. On screen, you see right now a picture of the gallery with two folks biking in front of it. And one thing I think is important to note is that at LISC, we don't tell their story. They tell their story, and our work is boosting their capacity to do so and boosting the organization and helping uplift their voice. So the importance of storytelling business. I want to talk for a little bit about why all of this is important. Storytelling has the power to influence. It has the power to inspire. Stories provide explanation, sometimes accurate, sometimes wild. The author, Brene Brown, has a great line she uses that I really like. She thinks through, what's the story I'm telling myself? What am I telling myself here? Is this accurate? Oftentimes that may not line up with what's actually happening. So if you're a business, a compelling story can boost your brand and sales. And there's a lot of data here to show how much having that compelling story can boost your sales, can help with your marketing, it can increase your followers, and all the things that businesses, especially now, are trying to help. Stories connect people, not just products to people, but people to people. Stories capture our humanity. They're important because that narrative captures our history. It's no coincidence that many cultures and communities have an oral history. We are literally, as people, we're hardwired to process the information we receive in stories. So it makes sense that businesses and people need to connect in this way also. What I'd like to leave you with is that everyone has a story, everyone. They have a tale that takes them to where they are at that point in time. And it's important to keep that in mind in our interactions with others and to act with empathy. Your story is important individually, It's worthy of its own book. And the best part is you get to decide that arc and how you respond to it. We're inexorably interconnected from Botswana to Sri Lanka to Minnesota. It's quite unbelievably how closely the threads of connection stitch us together. I encourage you to try to find authentic ways to share your story. If you're a business, find compelling and authentic ways to sell your business's story. And businesses and artists have a leg up here. You're making original products, original content, and that's the feel of the internet. Stories nurture these connections. They make them all possible. This is your story. The only thing that you have to decide is, what do you want to write? Thank you so much for joining us for these lightning rounds. I really appreciate you being here. Please feel free to connect. Happy to talk with anybody, share stories. I'd love to hear your story. My Twitter and Instagram hashtag is there, and my email address is there as well. Thanks so much. I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. Our final speaker is Yahan Brown-Lee Chen. She will speak on women in global business expansion. Yahan started her supply chain procurement experience at Boeing, after which she helped increase data center global expansion for Amazon Web Services. Yahan traveled to Asia, Europe, and Africa as part of her work to establish a global footprint for data center cloud providers, setting up their global presence in over 15 countries. She's going to take you through her career journey as an international businesswoman and the bumps and challenges she has encountered. Yahan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Phil. My name is Yahan Brown-Lee Chen, and thank you so much for having me today and share the same stage with so many wonderful women. Just listening to your story, just so inspiring. So thank you for joining me and celebrating Women's History Month. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Taiwan, and grew up, I want to be a flight attendant so that I could travel around the world. But I was too short, and couldn't meet the high requirement. So I thought my dream was far from reach and maybe impossible. And when I turned to 18 years old, I bought a one-way air ticket by myself. First time ever flew on the airplane and flew into the United States, arriving in Seattle. So now 20 years later, I have visited, age 40 now, I have visited 35 countries so far, and including 13 countries for work and 21 countries for pleasure, as shown on the map here. In year 2019, before the COVID pandemic, I went to 16 countries for work and pleasure as well. So I'm really hoping we can go back to normal again, so we can all start traveling and visiting friends and people and visiting many wonderful countries. So for me, after graduating from the University of Washington Business School in 2006, I started my corporate job at a Boeing company. I was an airplane component buyer. As a procurement agent, I managing manufacturing suppliers. Many university students and young professionals always ask me, what's my advice to them to have a job to be able to travel around the world? So on the personal side of a note, I always suggest to the student that taking on as many student leadership roles as much as possible, because many of my job interviews, the interview questions are around my leadership skills, even for entry-level jobs. Because a company, they can teach you everything related to job-related information you need to know. They can teach you how to do financial analysis. They can teach you how to create a dashboard reporting. But who you are and what you bring to the table as your leadership skill is something that the company cannot train you. And that's what the global employers are looking for, that your leadership skills. Like Yara was saying, the corporate social responsibility meeting she started, it's about the actions you're doing, how you train yourself to become a young leader since school, and how can you leverage that leadership skill into the corporate world as well. So on the personal side note, my advice to young professional is that my rule number one, I never date anyone from work, because you never know what might happen. And one day the person you think can become your peer, can become your boss, or even better, you become his boss. So always stay professional at work. And another rule I have to myself is that always go to the social event as much as possible. Drink socially, connecting your colleagues, connecting your people from business settings. But you need to know about your liquors. You need to know your alcohol limit. So always protecting your image. And also, if you hear gossip, right, don't repeat the gossip, right? Sometimes the gossip is good to know to help you to navigate the corporate politics and understand the dynamic between different leaders. But you don't need to repeat the gossip. And my third rule to myself is dress for success. I don't wear a heel, I don't wear a skirt, especially I'm in a manufacturing setting. A lot of the time, I'm the only females representing in the conference room, in the business meeting, and I representing my company, I represent my subject matter expertise, especially in a lot of male-dominated industry. Hopefully we can change that soon. But in a lot of settings, we need to watch our behavior or our dress. So that's the advice I would give to some young professionals. So then from Boeing, I went to the Amazon Web Services to build data center around the globe. Having a global international business job sounds very glamorous. A lot of people say, wow, it's so nice, you got to travel around the world. But I have to share with you that there's a lot of sweat and tear behind it. For example, I was working 15 hours a day, 6 days a week, because of the different time zones. And it's also very competitive job market on the global expansion type of role. Especially you have to deal with so many different time zones as well. But I have to say I have no regret. During this time, I learned so much, I grew so much, and always follow your passion. That's also another advice I give to the student is that sometimes you might have to work for a difficult boss, right? The boss that is so being tough on you, very demanding. I think if you enjoy the same of work, I know it's painful sometimes, but as long as you can learn and grow from it, and willing to work 15 hours a day in order to leveling the playing field, because I have to say for me, English is my second language as well, and to be able to competing with so many talents in the company, outside the company, and be able to demonstrate my knowledge with people being in the industry for 20, 30 years, I have to learn extra harder. I have to work extra hard to level the playing field. So I really enjoy my job. It's hard work, but really you grow so much from it. So once you earn your reputation, you earn your respect, your employer will feel comfortable to send you around the world, right? They will trust you, your ability to get the business deal done, to get the closing the deal, to solve the problem. So the respect is earned from your manager, your subordinates, your people around you. And so I was able to piggyback some of my side trip with my business trip. So I was able to, traveling to South Africa for work, and then a quick hop over weekend to Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. And then from Indonesia, I hop over to Thailand and Japan. And from Singapore, I hop over to Korea, from Turkey to UAE and Netherlands, and went to Ireland, and then jump over to Germany and Belgium and Slovakia, and jump over to Austria. So it's really, I feel lucky and also grateful to be able to travel and enjoy and do what I do as well. So every time I travel to a new country, my goal to myself is I have to learn at least 10 local languages. Simply from, hi, hello, how are you, and thank you, daily conversations. Because if you show you take your time and you sincere to learn about their culture and be able to open the conversation using their language. A lot of time people are very, very friendly to you and they want to help you out. So I always challenging myself to learn at least 10 words before I travel to different countries. And also when on the business travel, connecting with your local colleagues and ask them to show you around where the real local people goes, right? Not always the high tourist area, but also to go see a local culture, a local people go, where they go eat, right? Your stomach might be upset with you, but it's okay. It's part of learning, it's part of growing. And also when you being sent by your employer to travel, don't pick and choose, right? Because when you start pick and choose, right, people start, okay, am I choosing the right person, right? So you need to be open-minded, right? Where the business needs, you are able and willing to travel as well. So that everything you will learn something, even though a lot of US media will show some bad image about certain countries, but when you get there, you will know that humans are very kind and they want to help you. So always try to connect with the locals. And when you take the side trip, I have a story to tell when I went to South Africa for work. And I purposely choosing a lot of cultural events. I study their history about the history going on in the country in the recent past or past significant event. And I took a township tour when I was visiting South Africa. And then guess what? The next day when I had the business meeting, that's my icebreaker, my talking point. And then I asked my contacts, my business partner locally, what's their point of view, what's their perspective. And really this helped me throughout a lot of business meeting negotiations, because they know that I'm a sincere person. I try to understand their countries and I try to facilitate the trade between US and their countries. So that really helps a lot to open their heart to me as well. So after working on so many global expansion projects, and there's definitely a playbook you can follow. There's a market entry strategy, how you develop the KPI, how do you stack and rank the countries based on the political environment, the product or services you try to offer, because depending on your product and services, your checklist will be different. The evaluation criteria is different. What you see on the screen here, even though I have a percentage rating, based on your goods and services, you might have totally different set of a rating as well. So there's definitely a way to evaluate the countries as well. And there's a lot of resource help you as well when the company try to expand globally. In a lot of those countries, they have investment agencies in those countries to try to help out and facilitate foreigner investment as well. So be resourceful. I think being a global expansion manager, your job is to see what the resources out there to help out your employer, your customers. And there's also a great resource from United States of America as well. A lot of embassies, the US embassy in different countries, they can help facilitate, help you to connect with the local business and provide you local resources, or even facilitate all the business leaders get together, just share their lessons learned. And there's a lot of resource out there can help you. And also the US Chamber of Commerce definitely is another great resource as well. And, I have to say the global trade, global international business, never a dull moment because things change every day. There's so many free trade agreements being formed or dissolved very frequently. And the countries align or separated. This really changing daily. I have to say this industry, global trade, is very fascinating, and it's also a great way for young professionals to get in. it's a type of industry that you have to always keep it up, your learning, in order to stay current. You cannot just say, oh, I have been doing this for 10, 20 years, I know it all. But no, in this environment, things, regulations change so often. You really have to keep it up. So I have to say that University of Washington Business School has various programs to help business to partner with undergrad and graduate school students to provide a market entry strategy and consulting services. Seeing firsthand interact with the students that they providing an excellent global entry strategy. So to those business professionals listening on this call, if you want to expand your business overseas, definitely give a call to University of Washington Business School. They have a great faculties and students to help out expand your business. And then just final note here, I listen to a lot of podcasts to help myself to stay current. This is just a few of the podcasts I listen to on a regular basis. And you really just have to keep up with this dynamic world and keep learning and be curious. And this one of the podcasts here showing the great fire chat. It's the host is also University of Washington alumni from Jackson School, Kevin Shimoto, and he also shared a lot of great insight about China. Since we know a lot of not a lot of news is being transparent to share outside China. So this podcast definitely gives a lot of great insights. So that's the end of my presentation. I'll hand over back to Phil.
Thank you very much, Jahan. And this concludes the formal portion of our program. And I want to extend a heartfelt thank you, as do all of my colleagues, to the audience for joining us, to our speakers for sharing their expertise, and the U.S. Department of Education. We are especially grateful to them because without Title VI funding for National Resource Centers, we'd be unable to present this program to you. Be sure to check out all of our centers, where we hope to see you at another presentation or talk in the future. Thank you all very much, and have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. And thank you on behalf of all of us.
Thank you so much.